Good morning. My name is Tim Roach. I'm with the Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce and Convention and Visitors Bureau. Thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day to come and learn more about a topic that has been in the news a lot lately. We have almost 150 in attendance today. People in this room are from hotels in Dakota County and around the state, businesses in Lakeville, and community members from all over the state, Twin Cities. We appreciate you being here and wanting to be a part of the solution. I would like to recognize our elected officials with us today. From the City of Lakeville, we have City Council Member Colleen LeBeau, Luke Hellier, and City Administrator Justin Miller. From Elko Newmarket, we have Joe Julius, City Council Member. From our school board, Lakeville School Board, we have Judy Kelleher. From the state, we have our House of Representative Roz Peterson. Did I miss any elected officials? Would also like to thank Paul and Jim from the City of Lakeville for filming today's event and putting it on the website later on. Thank you to Elko Newmarket Police Chief Steve Mortensen for joining us today, and former Lakeville Police Chief Tom Von Hopp for joining us today. Can we give a round of applause for our community leaders? The Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce and Convention Visitors Bureau serves as the advocate, resource, and leader for its members and the business community. In 2017, the Lakeville Chamber has worked hard in many areas, including workforce development, helping our Lakeville businesses find employees, teacher appreciations, welcoming new businesses and over 2,000 new residents, in addition to putting on seminars such as today's and active shooters. Thank you to our sponsors for this event, Dakota Law, Country Joe Homes, and the Lakeville Public Safety Foundation. We appreciate your support in putting on this event. Let's give a round of applause for our sponsors today. Although the Super Bowl is bringing sex trafficking to the forefront of the news, sadly, this is an issue that has been growing for years in Minnesota and even Lakeville. To moderate today's speakers on this hidden crimes, please join me in welcoming Lakeville Police Chief Jeff Long.
Well, good morning, everybody. As I was introduced, my name is Jeff Long, current Chief of Police here in the City of Lakeville. Been in law enforcement for about 29 years, and I've spent 25 of those years in Edina, which will come into play here shortly. But I feel privileged to be here today with 150 people that are interested in addressing this, as it was described, hidden crime. During my career, I've really seen two things that have evolved that I wouldn't have suspected they did when I first started. First was heroin, which we've talked about in the past, and you've probably heard a lot from the TV and so forth. But the second is human trafficking. The first time I actually encountered human trafficking was when I was in Edina, and this was before the internet. This was before the instant gratification on everything. But there was an operation they had brought 4 people from Asia over. All 4 had hepatitis, and all 4 were being used for human trafficking and prostitution. This is not to say that it wasn't going on all over, but it was my first encounter in a very upper class suburb that only had 1 hotel, and it wasn't taking place in the hotels. When people ask me about my career, I have to tell them that the rampant amount of prostitution is really, as I said before, what is surprising me. I think this presentation will open your eyes, and I hope when you walk away, you have some answers to some of your questions. But I need you all to know that this isn't just happening on a federal level, but it's happening on a very local level. It's happening in suburban America, it's happening in Lakeville, it's happening in Edina, it's happening in every single suburb, no matter where you go. So today we have with us Tom Stewart, who's in the Lakeville uniform. He's worked for the police department since 2002. He spent 3 years working as an undercover street crimes officer. He's worked a number of local operations to attack human trafficking at a local level. He's here to share his experiences and knowledge regarding trafficking in a suburban setting. Officer Stewart has been mentored by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Minneapolis PD, and the Office of Homeland Security. The assistance by these agencies has been invaluable. We're very lucky to have Christopher Olkers, a supervisor for Homeland Security, with us today. I will let them introduce themselves when they talk, but we're going to start out today with a presentation from Officer Stewart, which will take probably 10 minutes or so about a local level, and then followed by Special Agent Olkers, and then after these presentations, we'll follow it up with some questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Officer Stewart.
Hello everyone. I'm glad you all can come here. Like my chief just explained, I'll have a short little presentation on human trafficking, prostitution in a local level and touching a little bit on national, and then highlight the operations that my department has conducted over the years here. So, role of law enforcement officers in identifying and helping victims of human trafficking. A little bit about myself, just like the chief highlighted, I've been with Lakeville for a little over 15 years now. Prior to that, I was with Anoka County Sheriff's Department as a CSO, and I'm here now. So, besides that, a few things that I've taken a strong liking to in my profession, and I've had the opportunities. I was a drug recognition evaluator for a little over 8 years. I've been a taser instructor, firearms instructor, less lethal, use of force, kind of the status quo for any young, eager person joining the law enforcement department, trying to get involved with everything. Some of the proud stuff I'm proud of, I'm a SWAT operator, and I'm also an explosive breacher on our team. There's only about 8 operators in the state of Minnesota that are explosive certified, and it's a lot of fun. Blowing stuff up is pretty cool. And then, like my chief said, I was street crimes. We kind of mirrored our street crimes program through surrounding agencies and trying to make the quality of life better for Lakeville citizens. So we would focus heavily on theft from vehicles, construction site burglaries, thefts, and then also the stuff that we see on TV and we don't necessarily think occurs in Lakeville, but human trafficking, or better known as prostitution, it actually does occur. And there's certain things that we can see clues on help preventing it and help identifying it for us when you call. Human trafficking, what is it? A form of modern day slavery. A lot of the young women, young men that are put into this are forced into it. It's not the cliche pretty woman, Julia Roberts, pretty gal that gets picked up by a rich guy. This is just everyday average person that something's going on at home, something's going on in their life that they feel that they have to get into something to make money. They're befriended by these evil people that lie to them, give them everything they want, and then take it away and force them to continue this so they can profit. Victims are exploited for commercial sex, labor purposes. They have to provide for their family. They have to do this deed for this guy or that guy. Traffickers use force, fraud, coercion, achieve the exploitation. Force, a lot of the females that we had encountered over the 3 or 4 years I was doing operations, all of them said they were beat by the person that got them into that position. It's not so much that here's $300 for what you did with this guy. No, it's give the $300 to me. I beat you. Here's some clothes. Here's some food. Get ready in the next half hour so we can take it again. They're very bad people. Some of the stats that we were able to locate, it's the second largest criminal industry in the world after drug dealing, and it's one of the fastest growing issues that we have in this country. How are they trafficked? Force, fraud, coercion are methods used by traffickers to pressure them into servitude and abuse. A lot of them have been raped. A lot of the females I spoke with said they were raped, at a very young age. A lot of the females that are in this aren't joining at 30, 35, 40. They're 12, 13, 14, and it just continues on for their whole life. They have nothing else that they know. Fraud include false and deceptive offers of employment, marriage, better life. A lot of the pimps will, pick that impressionable young person and say they're the best, they're the most beautiful person. I want to treat you right. I want to give you everything you want. And they'll do that initially until he starts getting the money, and then they are no longer the eye of the attention because he's always trying to find new females, new people to come into his corral. The coercion, threats of serious harm to physical restraint of any person, any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause victims to believe that failure to perform the act would result in restraint against them or the abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process. They will say that, you don't do this, I'm going to call the cops on you, we'll put you in jail, we'll go in prison, you're not going to see your children, do everything, I'll hurt your family. They'll say and do everything to make these people do what they want. The mindset of trafficking victims. Distrust outsiders, especially law enforcement. We can help you get what you need, and we can protect you. You can trust us. Talking about the females I've encountered here, this isn't all like, wow, I'll spill all of my information to you after you've just arrested me and the John because of this op. You really have to build that trust. They've been lied to their whole life. They've been beat their whole life. Me wearing the badge, and I'm a male, they're even more distrustful of me because they've had men in their life that have said they'll do everything for them, but in reality, all they do is hurt them and force them to do stuff. So usually it takes a few hours after the interview process for them to kind of open up to us and really say, what can we do to help you get out of this? And that's why it's been great with our local churches and our local pastors to help make contact with them as far as giving avenues for these women to have an outlet to talk to and get out of this process. They usually do not identify themselves as victims. They often blame themselves for the predicaments. They'll say, well, I'm addicted to drugs or whatever. I needed to make money. This was my fault. This isn't about me or this isn't about my family. It's all about me. This is my issue. They don't like to admit the fact that, just like we wouldn't like to admit anything, that we're a victim of anything, Although many victims may have been beaten or raped, current situations may still be better than where they came from. Again, I had kind of touched a little bit that a lot of this, a lot of the prostitutes or a lot of the young women that we've encountered have had, a terrible life. They've had, either terrible parents or terrible family members or something destructive happened early on in their life that put them into this situation. They're unaware of certain rights, or they may have been intentionally misinformed about rights in the country. Kind of highlighting some of the over the seas females or males coming into the country. Like, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you a license and a job and this and that, but first, I need you to start working for me. Again, that false hope, that false sense of security that they're going to make everything better. A big thing, fear of safety for the families. The big thing that we in law enforcement, a bad guy says some, jacked up stuff to us, we're really not concerned. What we're concerned about is they know they can go after your family members. Kids in school, wife at work, husband at work, whatever. That's what these guys do here. I know your kids go to school here. I know your family works here. You don't want to play ball with me. I know, maybe one day we hurt them. So fear is a big thing. Who are the victims? Approximately 800 to 900,000 victims yearly are trafficked across international borders worldwide. 18 to 20,000 trafficked into the U.S. Annually. More than half of the victims trafficked into the U.S. are children. Victims are probably about equal to women and men. The North Dakota, the fracking, the oil boom that happened not too long ago. Speaking to officers out there and some of the classes I've been to through the years, you wouldn't believe how many young women were trafficked into that area. And if we had anyone from that area, they could tell you that was one of the biggest things besides drugs, with all these workers coming from across the country and across the border, is the trafficking that was going on there. Just absolutely astonishing. Victims can be trafficked into the U.S. from anywhere in the world. Many do not speak English, unable to communicate with service providers, police, or others who might be able to help them. Within the U.S., both citizens and non-citizens fall prey to traffickers. Like we had said before, talking to some of these young women, average entry age into this is about 13. Once people start becoming of age and self-aware of their body and their own mental status, it's a very young age to get pushed into this stuff. Some of the common myths. all prostitutes are willing participants. I've encountered some people that are pretty jaded, definitely not law enforcement friendly. But when you sit down and after a few hours and you hear their story, after 25 years of being a prostitute, addicted to drugs, trying to deal with children or miscarriage, it's just been a terrible life for 25 years listening to them. And a lot of what has changed over the last decade is us always arresting the prostitute too and the John, and usually the prostitutes would have a higher sentence, a higher fine, something worse than the John themselves. And thankfully things have changed. I went to a seminar called Breaking Free. If you actually sit down and listen to the stories and how the laws have changed to help them, is that, I'll specifically say the females, is that they're not the criminals. It's what they're being forced into. It's the John that wants what he wants. It's the pimp that wants his money. It's not the female that's the issue. Trafficking is a crime prosecuted at only federal level. Our laws are set up on both sides, depending on what the situation is. Is it an adult prostitution issue or is it a child prostitution issue? Generally, the federal will be higher offense for the child. Locally, if a member in the city here hires a prostitute and gets caught, it's usually a misdemeanor, maybe a gross misdemeanor, depending on his record. All participants involved in human trafficking are criminals. And that was a mindset years ago, that everyone involved, you're breaking the law, because that's what the law was written as, and that's what it said. Just like we had said here, they're not. The young girls, the young men, the young boys that are involved in this aren't the criminals. It's whoever's forcing them into this. There's very few that what they call independent contractor, if you will, it's kind of the terminology some of them will say on these ads, is that that's not really the case. Because to go out and, see 10, 15, 20 different men a day just to make a few dollars here, and no one's making thousands and thousands of dollars, and that's what they're, meant to believe that is going to happen. That's not the case at all. Does it happen here? Like we had talked about from the beginning, yes, it really does. It doesn't have to be a shady hotel. It doesn't have to be the high-end hotel or a very fancy house or a very bad house. It happens everywhere. With the internet, with social media, it is so easy and prevalent for Johns to find victims. If you go on Backpage, if you ever search that, you wouldn't believe how many ads are posted daily. It happens everywhere. And a lot of them want the house because of our operations and other agencies' operations of hitting hotels so much. They know that 9 times out of 10, this could be bad. I could get arrested. But their desire to get what they want outweighs the risk. And that's how we usually catch them, is that because they want it so bad, they're willing to take the risk of coming to the hotel and then getting busted. Locally identifying human trafficking. Local law enforcement officers are the most likely to first come upon crimes of human trafficking. Immediate concerns for local law enforcement, the domestic at the hotel, domestic at a house, things don't add up. Someone's, in North Minneapolis coming all the way down to Lakeville. How do we know each other? That things don't add up. Those are all like simple clues to us and to other agencies of, something's not adding up here. You don't just meet someone on the internet, they come down here for a few hours and now you're calling us because you had an argument over money. Identify crimes when there are trafficking are taking place. That's what usually we will focus on when we deal with a lot of issues at hotels. Beneath the surface of other crimes, scenarios to expose crimes, human trafficking. The prostitution rings, the pornography, illegal operations, domestic abuse, hotel clues. Prostitution, assaults, drugs, all go hand in hand. It's the guy that's coming to go get what he wants, he's got drugs. The pimp that's bringing the female down here, he's got drugs, he's got weapons. A popular thing a few years ago was that guys would, try to buy a lady off the internet, and then they would just get ripped by the pimps. You know, they get beat up, they got guns, they got knives, whatever. You know, that we encountered that over the few years. Trying to distinguish between the victim and the perpetrator. The pimps, if you know, speaking to, I've only encountered one true, you know, human trafficker or pimp. They are very good. They're very good at talking. They're very manipulative. They will tell you what you want to hear. And in law enforcement, we want A through Z facts, right? Very easy for them to try to pull the wool over our eyes. So very difficult people to prosecute. Stop crimes of trafficking in progress. Manage victims of trafficking as a witness. You know, treat them more as the victim than the criminal. And that's, like I had said before, what we've shifted from. Secure evidence of the trafficking for prosecution and trials. Anything involved in, you know, whatever sect act that they had wanted, they'll have with them. So these are some of the ads that we had posted. If you go on Backpage or Craigslist, you'll be able to see a variety of these scantily ads here. Even if you know how Google works, all you got to do is type in hot woman and you click images and anything is going to show up on Google. So you'd find some faceless individuals here, you know, at a party or what's not. You put that on Backpage. Our first operation was this operation 3 years ago. I put it on Backpage thinking I would have a few minutes before I got to our destination. Literally, to me, surprise, our phones were ringing off the hook. You put up the fake phone number, and it's calling the recorded phone for law enforcement. We had probably 15 calls within the first 10 minutes of us placing that ad. The amount of these Johns, these people on the internet are 24/7 and 365. Unbelievable how much they're looking for this and how much they get on there and call. So we had to race to get to our destination, set up the arrest team, the surveillance team, and then, you know, arrest the people. But all it takes is just a little bit of this, and people are calling left and right. Another one we did around St. Patrick's Day. You see how, you remember back, was it 2 years ago when Backpage got in big trouble for trafficking, and then they had to switch things? Backpage initially would take out anything vulgar. Once that died down, you could put whatever you wanted on there. You could put full nudes of your body on there. You could say any type of vulgar language on there, and you would get the Johns to come. Nowadays, if you go to, we went to Backpage just a week ago. We all heard of Snapchat. To make things easier for Backpage to circumvent them saying that, hey, we're not the problem here, it's the traffickers, it's the pimps or the whatever, the Johns. Well, this young lady, if it was really her or not, she puts a Snapchat icon on there. So it's just a picture, right? So you take a picture with your phone, it pulls up the ad on Snapchat, and then we know, or we've heard how Snapchat works, everything disappears. So that John's able to get a phone number, and then whoever he calls sets up that location. So for us to go after the John or the pimp, the ad's already disappeared, you know, as soon as they do that Snapchat stuff. Craigslist ads that we've done for human trafficking. Simple as this. This is an actual from our ad. You know, looking for daddy. Any daddies out there know how to treat a little girl. I'm in a hotel right now looking for some fun. We had multiple people calling this one. Another thing you'll notice now is that they'll link Facebook, Twitter accounts to the ad itself to help, again, make Backpage step away even further, saying that it's not us, it's everyone else. So then you can set up a fake Facebook account and you can have photos of yourself in provocative ways, trying to lure people as well. It's hard to see here, pulled it up a week ago. Every hour you'll probably get 10 to 15 new ads on Backpage or Craigslist. And then for our ops specifically since 2015, we had 7 arrests in that first operation, and then the subsequent operations there, 5, 4, 8 in July, 11 in November, 6 in March, and then 3 in August most recently here. And the numbers were getting lower as the time goes by because these Johns would hang up the phone as soon as our fake officer would say, we're at motels, or we're at a hotel or a motel, and they would drop it right there, knowing that, hey, I've been busted here before, or I've heard through others that we've been busted there. So 7 ops in 22 months, we had about 44 offenders arrested. And just like I highlighted before, because of this operation at the same local hotel and their cooperation and their partnership, the Johns are declining to come. Even when we had tried enticing the female prostitute to come, they would not come because they're like, we know this is going to be a setup. So that's pretty good on our part, I think, for our community, is that it's getting out there enough to know that, hey, we're going to have to keep going into a darker spot or something more different to get better. There's my speech. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Chris Holters. Again, I'm a group supervisor, so it's a first-line supervisor with Homeland Security Investigations, which is under the Department of Homeland Security. And I'm not going to go, I don't have this impressive resume as Officer Stewart here, so I'm not going to, I can't compete. But I have been the supervisor for child exploitation and human trafficking investigations for our agency for the past 7 years. And unfortunately, like I said, in cooperation with not only Lakeville, but other local communities, state entities, we can't, as a federal entity, we can't do a lot of what we do without local law enforcement and without the community. I think one of the things I kind of said before, or I want to say before, is I don't want to sound preachy. I don't want to sit up here on my soapbox and say, hey, this is a problem. Everybody knows it's a problem. Law enforcement, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. This is a community issue. When I talk a little bit about child exploitation and how it kind of intertwines with the human trafficking because of this, right? How many people have one? I have 2 on me. So how many have their kids have one? So again, I want to start out with, what are your kids doing online? And as early as 10, 11, maybe even younger, kids are getting cell phones and things like that. Again, I'm not judging. What I am saying though is this device is going to bring the people that I'm going to talk about into not only your community but directly into your home. So we talked a little. I'll talk a little bit. I'm not going to talk a whole lot, and I'm going to probably talk really fast because this is, again, a huge, type of topic to discuss in a very short amount of time. But as you can see, internet safety risks. One of the big things I kind of want to talk about is the 2 last ones, is the posting of inappropriate information and sexting, because those risky behaviors start leading into areas that I'm talking about when we go into human trafficking. So, again, there's some myths about predators, and I'm gonna talk predators and pimps in general, and I'm gonna talk in some of the terms that I might use pimp, I might use trafficker. I'm going to try to say if they're a victim, they're a victim survivor because they are moving forward hopefully in their lives. But the issue with a predator, you've got old men, pedophiles, they pretend to be young, they abduct kids from their homes. No, in fact, most of them, I'd like to say I'm 26, but I'm not, but look like me. They're the ones that are showing up in these operations, habitually. Generally not pedophiles. In many cases, when they're contacting, the youth they're not lying about their age. They're not lying that they're adults. They're straight up that this is what I'm doing. And they usually don't have to abduct. And I'll tell you, and I'll kind of explain why they don't have to abduct in a little bit. So when we talk about, as like Officer Stewart said, with the victims, mostly ages 13 to 15 is kind of where we start seeing that. We have seen younger, mostly girls, but there are boys. One of the things I am going to talk about is an operation here that involves exclusively boys. The history of sexual abuse and the engaging in the risky behavior patterns. I'm going to talk a little bit more because that's kind of dovetails into some of the why we see human trafficking and who the actual victimology is. So, Operation Roundtable. Very quickly, there's a lot of stuff on here. The main point is that this occurs. There was a large-scale operation. This was an international operation that utilized the dark net or the Tor network. Okay, in the end, there was a group of individuals, all men. They were systematically exploiting thousands of young boys. One of those individuals lived in Minneapolis, very well-respected doctor. In fact, he was a cancer researcher. He's now in jail, thank God. But he was arrested as part of this conspiracy. And in a large, to kind of make a large international type thing, bring it right into your community. Again, we interviewed multiple victims that were from every community, and they were from every household. It could be a poor all the way up into, we were in $1 million houses, talking to kids. There was nobody that was exempt, when you look at an economic stratosphere. So, part of this in child exploitation and in the human trafficking is the grooming that goes on. And a lot of that grooming can occur online. So a couple of the signs we talk about, is when you look online or you're talking to somebody or your kid, or again, it can be anybody, they're receiving gifts, they're receiving calls from unknown numbers, they're rejecting family, friends, getting upset when they're getting not on their computer or they're trying to minimize their computer. So one of the things that I can't stress enough is that this pimp or predator mentality, and that successful pimps, as kind of was alluded before, are masters of making their victims feel wanted. They find that need that is missing out of that child's life, and they exploit it. That could be that I need a boyfriend. I need to feel wanted. I need, physical things such as new clothes, a cell phone, whatever it may be. They will utilize that and exploit that. And as said before, I think anybody can fall prey to a victim of human trafficking. There is no one type of victim, man, woman, child. I just talked about boys. We've done human trafficking investigations where we've had adult women, adult men. It doesn't matter. So from the standpoint, Officer Stewart talked a little bit about the state response. The federal response is very similar in that we have very similar laws. We are very lucky in the state of Minnesota that we have very strong state human trafficking laws. So the main distinction when I talk about human trafficking, the sex trafficking, which was alluded before, is that fraud, force, coercion. So the one thing that I will say about federal law, which differs a little bit from state law, and it's actually in the state's favor, is that in the federal law, I have to prove fraud, force, coercion, whereas in the state, I don't. Typically, though, in the investigations that we do, that's not necessarily a problem. It comes out through multiple interviews with the victims. It comes in victims with our Johns and the pimps themselves. And also the forensic evidence, the phone, again, every time that record of, those texts and things like that, we're utilizing those to try to make our cases better and stronger. And then labor trafficking, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of fraud, force, and coercion. So this is one area that I didn't really put a whole lot in. I want to take a real short moment to talk about. We've had some successful labor trafficking investigations here in the state of Minnesota. One most recently was involving a Chinese victim, and again, in an affluent community. We ended up not only charging and arresting the trafficker, who was a female, who in a domestic servitude, our victim survivor was in a domestic servitude situation. And she is now back in her home country, reunited with her family, but that trafficker is now in jail. And not only did we put her in jail, but we sought restitution for the victim, for all of the NGOs, and lastly, we seized her house. So her house goes in auction. So for us, that's a very strong milestone in that it actually takes somebody's house where the actual crime occurred, and to, sell that and take those assets away from those traffickers is a big deal. So again, what is human trafficking? Where does it occur? It occurs everywhere. It occurs in the massage parlors, the brothels, agricultural, farm working, cleaning service, construction, restaurant work, domestic servitude, exotic dancing. The one thing I express is that it can involve crossing an international border, but it doesn't necessarily involve the movement of that victim. So I can prosecute a federal human trafficking case, and it can occur in Lakeville from start to finish. Just a couple of things, and I'm not going to talk. I've left some of the brochures from our agency and from the Blue Campaign. I'm going to just briefly highlight the Blue Campaign, which is a Department of Homeland Security human trafficking, their human trafficking outreach and prevention. If you go on and just Google the DHS or the Blue Campaign, there's a huge amount of resources out there. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, because you can Google yourself and see what's out there. One of the other things that I guess as I'm kind of talking about that, and we're talking about what's on your table in the pamphlets, is the Polaris Project, or the National Human Trafficking Center, has done a study and kind of done a prevention and outreach type thing for the hotel industry. So if you Google the Polaris Project and human trafficking in the hotel industry, you'll come up with a 4-page document. I apologize, I only have one copy up here, but it is a good read for prevention tips and things like that. So Officer Stewart alluded to the scope of the problem. I don't want to belabor the point. I guess the one thing I do want to say is that there's an estimated 15,000 to 18,000 victims annually in the U.S. alone. Imagine that, 15,000 to 18,000 people being exploited a year. And then also, when you look at some of these numbers, 100,000 American children are victims of commercial child enterprises or sex trafficking. One of the things that I guess I will kind of point out is when you look at an estimated 60% of those juvenile victims are runaways or homeless youth. That is one of the major risk factors that I'm going to kind of talk about here in a little bit. So as we talk about this, and if you identify a situation that believes to be human trafficking, do not confront the suspect, call 911. Don't call me, call them. They're the ones who are going to be the first responders. They have the opportunity. We've come in after the fact or very shortly. Sometimes we are there, in conjunction, right away. But again, call 911. So as I kind of bring this back into the social media, and we talked a little bit about Backpage. So the traffickers use those social media pages. They use that Facebook, that Instagram. That's how they recruit. That's how they find their victims. The pimps will utilize juvenile victims. They will actually recruit out of the schools. They will have the juveniles recruit other juveniles out of the schools. And I guess to kind of hone in on what a juvenile sex trafficking situation looks like, it is a very acute situation. It occurs in a very short amount of time. On average, it's about 14 to 21 days that victim is in that situation. And again, 14 to 21 days is a very long time. Now, the establishment of control, these are all examples of cases that we've actually worked where the trafficker has worked where he has knowingly had sex with juveniles and had HIV. He has, in many cases, in the second case, was an individual who had multiple women pregnant, all under the age of 21, And he used those pregnancies and the children as a lever to control those survivors. The other thing is the physical and emotional abuse, to include branding. We've had multiple cases here in Minnesota where pimps have branded their victims with tattoos. The nice thing is we do have a couple of NGOs that have stepped up and have helped in the removal of the tattoos after they've been out of the situation. And then lastly, the recruitment of offer through drugs. So this is a statement that was made to one of my agents several years ago, and it's kind of stuck with me. For those of you in the back, I'll actually read it because I think it's a pretty powerful statement. I'm looking for the girl who feels ugly and thinks she doesn't fit in. If 3 girls are walking together, I'm going after the one walking behind being ignored. I want the one who is afraid to make eye contact with me. That's a pretty scary statement coming from a human trafficker, from a pimp that is, purposely as a predator targeting young women. So as I alluded to, the big 3 risk factors for juvenile sex trafficking is the history of chronic runaway or absenteeism, that history of sexual assault or sexual abuse in their childhood at some point. That could have been a family member, family friend, outside individual, doesn't matter. And then a close relationship with someone who's been involved in that commercial sexual enterprise. Again, that goes back to that where peers recruiting peers. So one of the things, this triangle kind of demonstrates the challenges that we face in combating human trafficking. And as we've talked about here with the details, in the hotels and things like that, we're looking not only at we're looking at the demand side. The marketing side has been also talked about under Backpage. Backpage, Eros, Erotic Review, Craigslist. I mean, I can go on and on. So those are the other piece, and then of course the trafficker themselves. One of the things that, of course, as law enforcement we look to do is to not only shut down one triangle, because if we shut down one, the other 2 are still operating. So we look at a holistic effect in trying to stop all 3 of those. And in the case of Backpage, Texas, the state of Texas actually, I think, arrested the individuals or some of the people from Backpage and has worked to prosecute them. Again, we work to prosecute not only the Johns for the demand side, and then, of course, the trafficker themselves. Which brings me to the Operation Guardian Angel. So we started doing similar things, and again, we work exclusively with local law enforcement. We don't operate in a vacuum. But the Operation Guardian Angel stings, which we've done here in Lakeville, we've done all the way throughout the state, are very successful, unfortunately. We have never had an occasion where we have not had anybody arrested, again, unfortunately. And as Officer Stewart alluded to, when we've put up our ads, we've seen in a minute, 100 people can be, within 30 seconds, we're getting hits on our ads. So this is unfortunately an individual who's kind of my poster child. I've been using this individual, Mr. Kupke, for about 5 years, since the time that he was actually arrested and convicted. And I use him, as a good example or a bad example, unfortunately, because he kind of checks all the boxes of what you look at when you think of somebody who's an outstanding citizen, leads, basically that clean life, and has, a double life. So, and in this case, the headline here, this was actually taken from one of the local media. Elko man gets 3 days in jail for sex with teens in Egan Hotel. So we began a juvenile sex trafficking investigation. Again, this is several years ago, and identified two victims, 15 and a 17-year-old victim. We had 2 pimps. The pimp traffickers used force. In this case, at some point, they held the 2 victims at gunpoint in an Egan Hotel. Again, I'm not talking about Minneapolis. I'm not talking about St. Paul. I'm talking about Dakota County. I'm talking, surrounding community here. So it does happen here. And during the course of that, that commercial sexual exploitation of those 2 individuals, numerous Johns were brought, or came to the hotel and had sex with the juveniles. The interesting thing about this is during the course of this investigation, not only did we target the pimps themselves, who both received over 10 years in jail, we did get the juveniles, or attempted to get the juveniles assistance through whatever help they were needing. But this was the first time we actually used the state solicitation of a minor charge to actually charge one of the Johns. So he's kind of got a milestone there. But the one thing that I would say about Mr. Kupke when he was interviewed, after we identified him through not only our traffickers and our victims, through, again, electronic media, he was interviewed, and he said a couple of things. So he did admit having sex with 15-year-olds. I'll talk a little bit about, I'm going to jump back here. He did talk a little bit about that he did admit to doing it, and he said, yeah, you know what, they were pretty young. And so I felt bad for him, so I paid him a little extra. So diving into Mr. Kupke himself, again, I said, this is an individual who holds himself on the outside to the public as a very, I guess, good person. He was employed with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He was honorably discharged, served, honorably overseas in combat, was a Boy Scout leader, and then online purported himself to be steadfast in his faith and his Mormon beliefs. So there's, truly a dichotomy of, what's being put out in the public and then what's behind closed doors. And then lastly is an individual I'm going to talk real quick about is Lee Paul, aka Black. Mr. Black was, again, a force pimp. He used force, he used coercion in obtaining his, identifying, locating his victims, and then subsequently conducting his trafficking operations. So this investigation occurred over a 3-day period in about 4 years ago. So the one interesting thing about this, again, this is a success case in that this case actually went to trial. And a couple of things that we had as we moved about in this case was we had multiple juvenile victims and witnesses. It was a multi-jurisdictional investigation, and there was huge victim dynamics with not only chemical abuse, self-image and family structure, and issues with dealing with the family. But as you can see, this actually initiated in Rochester, moved to Columbia Heights, Maple Grove, and then was moving on as up north to Alexandria. To give you kind of an example of, unfortunately, Mr. Paul, he was, like I said, he was a full-time trafficker, and he was engaged in this trafficking enterprise, and he trafficked and he utilized multiple people to do that with him. So he did take it to trial. He did lose. He was end up sentenced to 33 years in federal penitentiary. And the one very strong point is we work very hard to create a case that doesn't rely solely on the victim survivors. So we are looking at phone records. We are looking at social media type things. We are looking at all of the electronic stuff out there to build a case so that we don't necessarily have to put a victim on the stand. In this case, both juvenile victims actually took the stand and were very brave young ladies and actually called out in person to their trafficker and helped in the process of getting them convicted. So again, I guess the point of this case is that they're out there. There are unfortunately people like Mr. Paul that are in our communities, operating in our communities, and continue to do so. So there's a couple of mechanisms by which, lastly, I'll kind of wrap up. We do have a tip line report, and there is also the National Human Trafficking tip line. And that's all I have.
thanks to both of you. What we have planned for the rest of the time is opening this up to questions and hopefully some answers. So let's just start with that. I have a variety of questions, but let's just start with the audience to see if anybody has any questions. I'll bring the microphone to you.
This is depressing, but this is a terrible problem. What can we do as community members? What should we be looking for to help law enforcement and the victim survivors? Specifically, list some items that we can do.
I think, you're doing it by being here, first off, by, participating and being aware and looking at, I guess, certain things would be is what happens with, not only your children or anything like that, but looking online and what your children are doing online, who are they talking to, things like that. But I would say from the standpoint of, a business, when you look at a business, this is primarily a cash-based business. An individual who comes into, say, a hotel with an adult male with a young child, and things kind of just don't look right. They're paying cash. They put the door hanger out that they don't want service. Like I said, I think there's kind of a lot of different indicators that are out there. There are some on the tables themselves. I guess there's a little card that's out there that kind of talks specifically about indicators and
Yeah, I think for the business themselves is look for what's unusual for your business. Someone being dropped off and then whoever dropped them off sits in the parking lot for hours. That's unusual. That's an indicator for law enforcement. I know when we do nightly patrols, daily patrols, we're looking for those unusual vehicles that are idling for a long time. They don't list back to the city. The hotels that have multiple people come in through the main door there, always looking for the same room number. That's unusual. And then we, in society, usually don't like to look a lot at other people because you worry about what they're going to look back at you about. With our job, I like looking at people, so they get to feel uncomfortable about something, oh well. But if you could pick up from some sort of clue, I mean, you all have contact with everyone, is that if you look at someone, something's not adding up, okay? You got this girl scantily clad, it's, 15 degrees out in Minnesota, and they're at holiday, and she's getting snacks to eat, and she's eating it like she's never ate before, and she's with a guy that doesn't even want to pay attention to her, but then she follows him out. Stuff that's unusual. Literally, the community is our eyes and ears for law enforcement. You give us the best opportunity to intercept issues that are going on in the community.
Just have a quick follow-up to that. I'll walk over there to get the question. There was a Supreme Court decision recently where hotels used to have to share their guest lists with law enforcement. And that helped us determine, when we would go and look at the guest list, number one, who was there and anybody we recognize. The Supreme Court now has said that hotels can demand a search warrant. We are lucky here in Lakeville. We've developed such a good relationship with the hotels that they're continuing to share this with us to help us combat this specific problem. So I think hotels and police departments can work very well together. It's unfortunate right now that the Supreme Court decided we needed a search warrant, but who had their hand up over here? Okay.
First, I want to thank you all because this is very important and it has touched our lives. My question is kind of from a mother's standpoint. It seems weird that I think it's great that you're helping the girls and the young boys and everything like that. But what would happen if we got rid of the Johns? Take away the money that's going into the pimps and the traffickers' hands and focus more on the men or women that are placing these ads. And when you place an ad, do you ever reference the numbers and the emails that come back? And if you have a repeat one that's come answering every email or every fake ad, do you ever maybe kind of watch the guy? Because these people that use the women and the boys and even older women and older men aren't, they're affecting everybody in the community and spreading disease. And I guess I just would think that if you got after the men more or the women more that are using the services, that would dry up the money. And so I guess that's kind of maybe a way, I don't know. And then another thing, this goes to the national man up there, thank you, regarding Cupkey. I'm wondering if nationally you are doing enough for the veterans coming back and the service people, because the Veterans Hospital is overrun with sexual addiction problems, and they're referring all their patients to the University of Minnesota, which has a waiting list of quite a few months. So again, I think if we get some of these men and some of these people that are leading double lives and not, that's all my question. I just think the veterans really need some help, and they're among us, everyone's among us, and they're not always young people. There might be your wife that's putting an ad on Craigslist, and then you're gone for the day and she's having someone in. Is there anything being done on that level to get some of these men out of here that are abusing? That's my question.
Yeah, I'll touch a little bit on your first part of the questions there. Within our community, we've gone after those women that have posted, come to my townhome, come to my house, and help them, get out of that. But again, they're usually involved. There's very few independent contractors that I've had experience with that they're usually involved by some other means, with a pimp forcing them to do what they need to do. If you could look at this sex addiction with prostitutes and pornography like drugs, it's difficult to get rid of. It's difficult to chop the head off this snake, right? You're talking about a natural desire and want from literally all human beings, and certain people take it to that extreme level that they're the ones causing the problem. But it takes a community effort. It's more than just one department that can make the change. We need more and stricter laws for these Johns, because the way it is right now, if I was the John and I hired a prostitute and they arrested me, it's generally a misdemeanor offense. It's what you would get driving without insurance in Minnesota. It's not a significant offense. And the courts are inundated with all these small cases, and they want to get them through. And this is my perspective. I'm not saying this is, the problem, but my perspective is that the courts are over inundated with cases. Prosecutors are overworked. To get the bad guys, it takes years to go after the pimp. Whoever the John that's arrested, it's quick to get them through. They want to make a plea deal. Don't do this again within 10 years. Okay, see you later. Doesn't have to make the paper. You don't have to ruin your life. The child predators, it's a felony, thankfully. They do prison time. Everybody finds out about it. Their whole life crumbles because they're demented people. But back to what I was my point being is that it takes all sides. We need the local law enforcement, we need our courts, our community, and then the federal level to help get rid of this stuff. But unfortunately, it's going to be around for a very long time, just like drug issues are a very prominent problem right now.
I guess if I can kind of dovetail on that, I've done a lot of presentations in the past, and it's typically women that are at the presentation. So I'm, very encouraged to see a lot of men here, because this is a societal problem. It's not something, kind of like I said before, we can't police our way out of this situation. I said there has to be a fundamental shift in, society, particularly men in general, that say, what, having sex with a 15-year-old girl is not, a societal norm, and we shouldn't be doing it. And obviously the bulk of people agree with that, but I said, when we post an ad and I say, I'm a 15-year-old girl and I'm, at a hotel, I said, again, I have hundreds of people that are willing to show up and risk, being arrested. So I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree with you. I think there's, a lot more that needs to be done. And I guess I'm encouraged in that, having a crowd this large show up to, listen to an issue, and then hopefully take that back and discuss with their families and think about that, I think is truly important.
Okay, we have one more question, then I'll be given very strict instructions to move on.
Just a quick comment, because the Super Bowl is coming, and it's going to be a huge issue at the Super Bowl, because we're going to have more than 1 million people coming in, and they say that sex trafficking is going to be pretty prevalent. And kind of a comment, people are renting their homes out, so now the pimps don't want to go to the hotels because they're kind of getting a clue that you guys have been doing a great job. So people who are doing VRBO, they ought to be careful.
So I guess we are in plans there will be not only, state but federal response to human trafficking throughout the Super Bowl.
Okay, and I know these two are going to stick around for a few minutes right after the presentation, so if you have more questions, feel free to stay after and ask them. I was given a list of questions that people had, so I'm just going to go through them quickly that they can answer. One of the questions was, do you think legalizing this on a national level could prevent or regulate this?
In my opinion, I don't think it's going to get rid of the problem. Amsterdam, certain cities in Nevada allow it, but you're talking about a specific set of individuals that are willing participants. They have a set of laws that they follow, and whoever is running the operation is helping them. Again, it goes back to should we legalize all drugs and control the problem? It's not going to stop the problem. There's always going to be that addictive abuse of the drugs or the sex addiction of these people. Me personally, in my opinion, I don't think it's going to stop it if you did legalize it, because you still have victims that are going to get forced into situations that they don't want to be in, and then maybe they'll have this cloud of protection now because, well, I'm working for this business that the state says it's allowed to happen, but even though I'm not getting paid and I'm getting abused, I don't think it'd be a good idea.
So federally, we do not prosecute prostitution as a crime per se. Like I said, the bulk of what we are doing is our child, or juvenile sex trafficking. And again, under the age of 18, there is no consent when there is a commercial sex act. So again, legalizing is not going to solve that problem.
And a follow-up question for Mr. Olkers. You mentioned in your presentation that the pimps will often pick the slow person. The person doesn't want to make eye contact. We do know that recruiting occurs in malls throughout America. What can shopping malls do to recognize this, to prevent it? I know you have a history of working in a mall.
So again, I think the indicators are just the same as whether it would be in a business, that individual that looks out of place with with an adult that appears not to be paying attention. Typically, if you hear something where the juvenile refers to the adult as daddy, and there's probably not a familial relationship there, is a potential indicator. I think the use of as you look at buying that individual clothes or cell phones or things like that, that would probably not be appropriate.
And then we talked a little bit of, okay, so you have a shopping mall. Somebody else asked, other than those brought to our country to do this, where else are the recruiting grounds? The internet, obviously, but where else?
Your schools, everywhere, outside your schools.
The question is, what can parents do other than watching their kids closely when they're on the computer? What can they do to help prevent this?
I grew up in the 80s, and we didn't have the cell phones or the internet yet. That's our biggest problem, honestly, is that we want that comfort of my 10 or 12-year-old has a cell phone. I can always get a hold of them, or they can call me if there's an issue. But when you open up that internet, you open up all those social media apps. Besides, Snapchat used to be just, was intended to be created as kind of a fun thing for kids. Well, then the pimps and the predators got a hold of that, and they're able to track and find kids that they want. The app Yellow, it's the same thing. Is that literally you're going to have to make your kids upset and look at every app they have, look at their phone contacts. Are they not saving phone numbers for a reason? Is it not, Tim or Rachel calling me? It's just a blank number, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way 10. We're looking at emails. Facebook was created, and then our age people took it over, and then the kids left that because we're creeping on them or whatever they call. So they went to Twitter, they went to all the Yellow, the Snapchat. So you literally have to involve yourself heavily on your children to be like, it doesn't matter what you want until you move out of our house. We're looking at your phone, we're looking at your history, we provide everything. And I think that would be a big key in stopping or identifying something.
Another question was, when do you receive the largest response to your ads? Is it typically advertising juveniles, boys, girls, adult males, or adult women?
For our ads specifically, the younger you went, the more interested these Johns were. Legally, or the way Backpage and Craigslist have been set up, they have some sort of computer that runs the ad. So if you posted, I'm 16, I'm 15, it would flag it right away and it would take it out. So, to get around that, you would not put an age on there. But generally, when the Johns would talk to our undercover officers, or in texting specifically, hey, I'm 14, is that cool with you? The younger the better, a lot of them would say. They want that, that demented personality that they have, that desires that they want it to be as young as possible and feel empowered over that young person.
How do people, you touched on this in your PowerPoint, but how do people really ever get out of this?
To be honest, I don't know if they ever do. As a survivor, I think the best thing they can do is there's resources out there. I certainly, I've never been in that situation. I can't, ever imagine being in a situation like that where I would have to deal with some of the things that these, young men and women are having to deal with. And there are resources out there. There's a myriad of different resources and NGOs that work with not only the juvenile but the adults that want to get out of the life. But again, you're dealing with deeply rooted, whether it be alcohol addiction, drug addiction, family issues involving potential sexual abuse, things like that. So it is an intertwined kind of social issue that would very much be dealing with all of those specific issues, and trying to get through those at some point. I mean, have we seen certainly, some of our juvenile victims, have they moved on to have successful lives? Yes, and a lot of them have had those roller coasters in life where they're doing great one day and then, an agent gets a call a year later and they're in jail or they're doing something else. I will say, we've had one where, she was a victim at one point and then became a trafficker 3 years later. So.
One of the things that was brought up earlier was law enforcement and what are we doing. I think Special Agent Olkers brought it up. It's difficult in law enforcement because our numbers are limited and there are so many different crimes and there's only so many people to go around. So it's very difficult for law enforcement to address this. I think your words were, we're not going to arrest our way out of this. We're not even going to law enforcement our way out of this. It's going to be up to the hotels, the malls, the people that monitor the internet and so forth, and people like you that are willing to come and take a look and be suspicious. So the last question I have before I'm out of time will actually, I think, be for Officer Stewart. 911 gets a lot of calls, and if somebody calls 911, a guest at a hotel or wherever, and says, something's odd, there's a lot of men coming and going from this hotel room, number one, what's the dispatcher going to do when they get that, and what is local law enforcement going to do when they get that information?
With any 911 call, whether it be a barking dog or something very significant, we're going to respond and try to figure out what's going on. If you go to the hotel with the family and you've seen a lot of traffic coming in the room and out of the door, you make the complaint to the hotel clerk, and then they call the police to help investigate. That all helps. Is that we're again, if you got that car in the parking lot idling, is the pimp out there or someone that's dropping them off? You have guys that are coming from all across the state, coming to the hotel, just not adding up. The biggest thing, like I said, if you notice things that are unusual, or the hotel staff that notice things unusual, is that's what law enforcement's for. Whether you think it means something or it doesn't, let us try to dig into it. And the great thing about the training that we receive, and that our department and other departments go through with the BCA and the federal training stuff, is the clues that we can look at. It's the, what do we see in the car? What do we see in the guest registry? What can we add up to be like something's not right?
We're going to wrap up the question piece. I'm going to turn it back over to Tim, who's got a very special presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Chief Long. Thank you, Officer Stewart and Special Agent Chris Olkers, very much for being here today. You can certainly hear the passion in everyone's voices as we ask questions, and great job from our speakers. Your attendance today is immediately making an impact as we committed to donating profits from today's to Passageways Shelter and Housing Program in Prior Lake. Passageways provides emergency shelter beds for youth ages 13 to 17 and housing for youth ages 16 to 24 who have been victims of sex trafficking. As a Rotarian myself, our Lakeville Rotary Club has made a year-long commitment to supporting Passageways, and we are glad to join them in their support. We are proud to be awarding a donation of $1,020 today because of you joining us. Here to accept the check on behalf of Passageways is Keisha Stewart. Keisha?
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and attention to this issue. I heard the question, what can we do to get kids out of this life? What can we do to help them? And I'm proud to say that through generous donations such as what was made today, that's what we strive to do each and every day. How we get these kids out of this situation is to fill those voids that lure the exploiters to them in the first place. If they need housing, we give them places to stay. They need a job so that they can support themselves in legal manners, then we assist them with that. We have on-site mental health therapy. We have outreach and aftercare. We have a school that is licensed through the Prior Lake School District. So what we're doing is saying, what are those voids that you have? How can we help you fill those voids in a manner that's not going to put you in harm's way, and that's going to put you on track to being the most successful citizen that you can be, and giving you the hope that you deserve, that all youth should have, right? 13 to 15 or 12 to 14, age of entry. Most kids are playing with dolls or going to camp, and our youth are forced to live a lifetime of horrific experiences during that time. So with support such as what we're receiving today, we can continue to remove those voids and allow youth to live the lives they deserve to live. So thank you very much.